Hello everyone, Jeanette Milio here. Let's summarize this module all about distribution. The main thing to know about distribution is that is the one thing that is responsible for any given project to generate profits. So it's a very important aspect that we really want to dive deep into in order to optimize the profitability of any project. So this week you are reading all the various module sections, including distribution, US theatrical distribution, international distribution, online distribution with streamers, television, release windows, the pitfalls of distribution, sales estimates as the basis for financing, sales estimates and pre-sales, from sales estimates to funding, and how banks, financiers, evaluate distribution risks. You're going to look at the case study number 3, which is The Experiment, a movie I produced starring Adrian Brody and Forrest Whitaker. I'd like you to watch all the case study videos and the step-by-step videos, as well as the guest speaker videos, of course. And then please read chapter 7 in the textbook Entertainment Finance today. And your key activity for this week is simply submit quiz 2 by upcoming Sunday. Thank you. So when we look at distribution, we're looking at all the various aspects of how a film can be exploited. So we're looking at a theatrical release, which is basically the movie going into the theaters, not just in the US, but all around the world. We're talking about a simultaneous release, meaning the film is going into theaters as well as, for example, being streamed online. We're going to talk about license deals, which is basically selling the license of a film to be exploited in the US or any other territory for a certain period of time. And then there is the split rights deal, which basically allows us to splitting rights, which is mainly done between the US and international. And then there is a co-production deal, which would be similar to a split rights deal, where we are splitting the US and the international marketplace. We are talking about pickup deals and a negative pickup deal, which is basically when we pitch an idea to a studio, streamer, or network, and they either buy the idea based on the idea, then pay for everything, including development, production, and they're releasing the film as they see fit. And then there is the negative pickup deal, which is basically a streamer, studio, or network station buying a finished movie. And we're talking about commissions, which is something that is used in the world of television, where a network station or a streamer, could also be a streamer, not just a network station, will commission a show, which is normally a TV series, where they're saying to us, we like this idea and we want you to produce this TV show for us. It's the, I should say, television version of a pickup deal. And then there is the buy-on, where a producer can buy a certain time slot on a network station. And then there is the revenue share deal, where no license fee is paid up front, and we, the producer, participate on the revenues generated normally with a film that is released on streamers. Let's talk about theatrical distribution and the various options that are available to a producer when it comes to releasing a film in the theaters. So let's look at theatrical distribution particularly. As mentioned earlier, a pickup deal is when a producer pitches an idea to a studio or any theatrical distributor for that matter, which could also be a streamer, because they also release films theatrically at sometimes, depending on the project. So we would pitch the idea to a streamer or a studio, and they like the idea a lot and decide that they would develop the film, pay for production, and then release the film theatrically, in any which way they desire to do. So it could be a small release on a few screens, it could be a medium release on a few hundred screens, and it could be a wide release on a few thousand screens. This case is a case where the distributor would own and control the IP and all related rights and revenues. So the content provider, the producer, would assign all rights to the entity that picks up the idea, which again can be a studio, can be a streamer, could also be a network station if we're talking about a television movie. And then there's the license deal, and the license deal can be done also with the studio or a network station or a streamer, where in this situation, when we're talking about a studio, for example, would mean that the studio would buy a license from us and would pay a license fee. And the license would define a certain period, which we call a term. And for that term, excuse me, the studio would have the option to own and control the film as they see fit. So for example, if a studio buys the rights to release a movie in the United States and they buy the rights for 3 years, they can do whatever they want with the film in the United States for 3 years. So they would pay us a license fee, and then after 3 years, when the license had expired, we get the movie back and we can sell it again, either to the same studio or to another studio. So the IP is really controlled by the content creator, by the producer, by us, and we only license the right for exploitation to the studio. The split rights deal is something where the studio, or in this case could also be a network station or a streamer, who would buy rights, would buy the US rights in perpetuity and leave the international rights for us to distribute and sell. So they would own the US rights and all related revenues forever, which is what in perpetuity means. So it's not like the license deal that I mentioned earlier that comes back to us after a certain period of time, a certain term. In the split rights deal, the rights would not come back to us. They are owned by the studio, by the buyer, forever. But we would keep the international rights, and they would be sold by us through a sales agent. And then there's the rent-a-studio deal. And the rent-a-studio deal is a situation where the producer will raise the money for the P&A, for the print and advertising financing, which is basically the money that is used to release a film, to create a marketing campaign for the film, to release it in theaters. So we would rent the studio's marketing department, if you want, and their releasing power, and pay the studio for their work. They get a distribution fee, and we pay the P&A. So the studio would not be paying for the release campaign, which is what they normally do when they release a film. We would be paying that. The content provider would be paying that, and we would basically rent the studio, meaning we are hiring their services to release the film in theaters in the US. In this case, the IP is owned and controlled by the producer. Four-walling is basically the same thing than a rent-a-studio deal, but it's not with a studio. This is something we can do with an independent releasing company, and the studio would not be involved, but we would still, again, raise P&A financing to create a release campaign for the movie, to market the movie, then release it in the theaters in the US, and we would pay for that. In this case too, the IP would be owned by us and controlled by us, meaning by the producer. A limited release is basically nothing else than a theatrical release that is released on a few select markets where the studio feels this movie will do very well. It's often done for art house films or Academy Award contenders, where they release it in a limited way because it's not something like a tent-pole movie or a Marvel or a DC or a franchise where they release it wide, which would be a film that is released on more than 1,000 screens in the US. When a film gets theatrically released in the US, chances are it's also going to get theatrically released internationally. This could go two ways. For example, if a US studio does a US release, the foreign divisions of that studio would likely also handle the international theatrical release. Now there's also the option that the US studio just does the US release, maybe because they were rented as a studio, or they bought the license, or it was a split rights deal where the studio owns the US rights and then the producer owns the foreign rights. In that case, the producer can handle the international distribution rights through a sales agent, and the sales agent would then sell the theatrical rights to foreign distributors. When we talk about a TV show, it's similar. In the US, the TV show would be aired maybe on a streamer and a network, and then internationally, it would be sold to international networks. International distribution rights are sold through sales agents who represent the project on behalf of the producer and sell international distribution rights to foreign buyers. And these international distribution rights include theatrical rights, DVD, VOD, streamer rights, other online rights, and of course television rights. International sales agents conclude pre-sales, which are distribution agreements that are signed before a film is finished, before it's actually being produced. And international sales agents also conclude sales, which are distribution agreements that are concluded after the film is finished. So pre-sales again are distribution deals that are signed before the film is produced, and sales are distribution deals that are signed after the film is produced. These are likely the same deals, they just happen at a different time. And then the foreign distributor rights, in the case of pre-sales, pay, for example, an installment of a down payment between 10 and 20%, and then when the film is being delivered to them, they will pay the balance between 80 and 90%. And then the foreign distributors release the film theatrically on DVD, VOD, online, and on TV. And they don't have to release it theatrically. They don't actually have to release it on anything at all if they don't want to. They do buy those rights in many cases, and then they decide what the value is for them locally and how they want to handle the local release in order to make money. And if they do a good release and the film really does have a success in the box office, they don't just pay the minimum guarantee that is due based on the license agreement, they also pay overages. So what that means is that the producer does not have the box office risk because the distributor pays before they release the film. But if the film does well, the producer participates. A fairly large part of the industry today is online distribution with the streamers. And we as producers can create content to be sold to the streamers and be streamed by the streamers. So when we look at distribution with streamers, it is not dissimilar to distribution with anyone else. Think about the streamers as buyers, as distributors, as studios, because that's in essence what they do. Nowadays, they work a little bit like studios where they decide for certain films to go theatrical, and then they put them on the streaming platform, and then they relicense them to maybe another streaming platform that is not owned by them, and then they get a license fee for that. And then they might even license the film to a network station and get a license fee for that. So they operate a little bit like a studio today, even though it is a streaming company, but they buy all rights from the content provider so that they can license the film in on other distribution platforms like theatrical and television and another streamer. So the way we work with them is that they can, come and say, listen, we really like your idea. So if you pitch it to us, we're going to do a pickup deal and we will pay for everything. In this case, they would control the IP and all related rights. So that's what they can do. They can pay for everything and basically then control the entire component in relation to the movie, like the studio would. And then they can buy just streaming or other distribution rights. So maybe they decide, we don't want to buy the entire idea. We don't want to pay for everything. We might just want to buy the streaming rights or maybe streaming and television rights. And we want to buy them for a certain period of time. And that would be similar to like a license deal if you want. They can also buy US rights and certain international rights, for example. They don't necessarily have to buy all worldwide rights. They can say, we want to buy the US, maybe we'll also buy Germany, and we'll also buy France because we have a strong presence there with our platform. So they buy select international rights in addition to US rights. They can do that. And they can buy, of course, as I mentioned, all worldwide distribution rights if that's what they want. Obviously, the more rights they buy, the higher the license fee is. They normally pay a license fee up front, meaning when they buy the rights for a movie, if it's all worldwide rights, they usually pay for the entire production and pay a little more like a premium on top of it, or if they buy certain licenses, let's say for the US or other international distribution rights, they pay license fees for those areas, for those territories if you want. And they're normally paid up front, meaning they do a deal that is a license deal with us, and it says we're going to pay you 20% up front and 80% on delivery, like a normal license deal would be. But there are also streamers that we've done deals with where they say we want to pay you over a period of time. So meaning it is not uncommon that that a streamer would say to you, we're going to buy a movie and we pay you in quarterly installments over the next 2 years. That has been done, that has been seen. So there is a payment structure that can be adjusted depending on who it is. And there are those streamers who don't pay anything up front, and they basically say to us, we're going to put your movie on our streaming platform, and then whenever we generate revenues, you get to share in those. They'll charge a distribution fee, of course, so when revenues come in, they charge a distribution fee off the top, and then they share the revenues with us, either 50-50 or 60-40 or 80-20, whatever the deal is that we do with them and how we share the revenues with them.
When we work with television today, we are producing television series, we are producing reality series, we are producing documentary series, we're producing scripted or non-scripted content. We might be also producing TV movies. And there are various options to be working with television networks today. So when we work with television, we work with broadcast networks, cable networks, and we also work with the premium networks. And how are television distribution revenues handled? For example, if a foreign or domestic theatrical distributor buys all rights, which include television, they will then sell the television rights to a television network to refinance and recoup the minimum guarantee that they have paid to the producer for those rights. So for distributors, this is kind of a recoupment mechanism to sell television rights, which they may not need because it might just be a theatrical distributor who doesn't have a network station. So a lot of times theatrical rights are bought and then they're going to be resold to a local network. The networks do, when it comes to films, have some niche product happening. So if you look at Hallmark, for example, they always have these nice, light, fluffy, lovely, family-like films, Lifetime, similar. So there are, when it comes to TV movies, certain networks that do low-budget films that will meet their audience and feel like they're branded for their network. And of course, as mentioned earlier, networks buy scripted and non-scripted content, which they buy either as a commission, as a co-production, or as a license deal. Some of these networks have now expanded into streaming territory. That means the network might also buy the streaming rights from you, or from the producer, that is. Release windows represent the path of a release, meaning what is released on what distribution platform at what time. So when we look at these release windows, we notice that first in line would be the exclusive theatrical release, which starts right from the beginning when the movie is produced and finished and delivered, up to about 4 months. Now, obviously, this can change. If the movie is not very good, then it's not going to stay in theaters that long. The international exploitation kind of works after that. So it could be that some theatrical movies are released right away in international territories, and some movies are just released a little later after the release in the US has taken place. DVD follows right after theatrical release in the territories where DVD is still a thing. And then after that, you're going to have a pay-per-view possible release, which is after the theatrical release. And then we're going online and on VOD. And we are looking at this release schedule, which looks like basically covers a 2-year schedule. And last in line is the television release. Now, you've noticed that recently these release windows have kind of melted together. We hear a lot about simultaneous release, meaning a movie gets released in the theaters and also on a streaming platform or on a pay-per-view VOD kind of scenario. This is often done these days, and we're also seeing that theatrical release timing, meaning the length of a theatrical release in the theaters, has become much shorter. So with these shortening and melting together kind of release windows, everything kind of moves up. So that means that the television release is not likely going to be 2 years after the theatrical release. It could be just a few weeks or a few months after the theatrical release. Given that distribution is the source of financing, it is the source of revenues for us, it is very important to understand and really know about some of the pitfalls. When we look at distribution, we look at these two entities. We look at sales agents and distributors. Sales agents sell distribution rights to distributors, and distributors release the content on the distribution platforms that they control in their territory. With sales agents, we have to do a few things to make sure that revenue comes in and that it comes in at a certain time and during a certain period. So one thing I have suggested to you, which is something I do, is I put a performance clause in the agreements with the sales agents that basically dictates, or we both agree, there's no such thing like dictating, but we both agree how much money they believe they can make with the sale of distribution rights by what time. I also talk to them about sales fees and expenses, and the idea is obviously to keep them low and keep them feasible. In many cases, you have sales estimates that were issued and they turn out not to be correct, which is something that happens. It's not necessarily the fault of a sales agent, because a market can shift, and sales agent that were projecting something today could be projecting something else in 6 months. But it could be that the sales agent was a little more flowery, for lack of a better word, than he should have been, and wasn't really conservative in projecting the numbers realistically. Another issue we're facing with sales agents is if they are simply incompetent to do any pre-sales. It could be for two reasons. They could just be really incompetent and lazy, or it could very well be that the project does not find a market demand and that people are just not buying it because it's not what they're looking for right now. The revenue protection is essential, which means the sales agent should not be the one receiving distribution revenues. Distribution revenues should be sent to a neutral party, which is a collection agent. You can kind of compare a collection agent with an escrow agent, meaning it is not the sales agent that holds on to the distribution revenues and at some point makes a report, and hopefully that report is correct. It is actually a neutral escrow kind of agent that is paid by the distributors, and that escrow agent will basically just issue a report immediately. Correct reporting with sales agents is always a little bit of an issue in my personal experience, which is why it is good to have someone neutral who has no agenda doing the reporting. The other issue we have with sales agents is that most of them are not bankable. If we're not working with a bankable sales agent, we can't really do anything with their sales estimates. They're useless to us when it comes to obtaining a bank loan. We also have to make sure that when we are giving our sales agent a piece of content, a film or a television show, that it matches their lineup. A lineup is the products that they're selling from other producers at the same time, meaning when they go to the Cannes Film Festival, the question we would have is, what other films are you selling? And are you selling a lot of other films? In which case, my film might just be drowning because there's too much going on. Or are you selling films that are really not like my film at all, which means buyers might not even come to you as a sales agent to look for something because they wouldn't know to find the kind of product that I have produced and you're selling. Simply meaning the sales agent is known for a certain kind of product, and that's the kind of product they are selling, which needs to match the product that we're producing. The ideal thing with sales agency agreements is to not have them have a very long term. because if they are exclusive, and if they're exclusive for a long term and the sales agent doesn't really do much with the movie, we're basically losing money and we cannot recoup our investment. So it is better to have a shorter term sales agreement, as short as it's possible, and then be very defined in regards to the rights. So the sales agent shouldn't really get any rights. They only get the right, the exclusive right to sell the content, but they're not actually getting distribution rights. There should be a provision made, if possible, that if a sales agent, for example, would have a bankruptcy issue or would go bankrupt, that there is a way to remove our film out of the bankruptcy mess, meaning out of the assets. And there are ways to do that in an agreement. Now, when it comes to distributors, we're often dealing with high distribution fees and expenses, as we've seen with our Harry Potter example in an earlier module. So the job we have to do as producers and investors is to make sure that these fees are kept as low as possible and that the profit definitions are not confusing, meaning a distributor should just deduct certain costs that they have, and that should be a distribution fee that is defined, it's a percentage, and a distribution expense that is defined as a percentage, and that should be all that should be deducted. Sometimes distributors pay late or not at all, and that's an issue in general. Doesn't happen very often, but it sometimes happens. And the main issue that we're all facing is the overage reporting. It is not easy to figure out how much money did the distributor in a country really make and how much did they spend, and should I, as the producer, get overages. You would actually have to go there and check all their books locally. You are getting a minimum guarantee payment, so you are making money right away. And sometimes it's really not worth, flying to a country in Europe and figuring out what kind of overages are actually applicable here. But there are people that do this, and there are actually special auditing firms that do this. The extended terms and rights refers to the fact that distributors should have a first run right that might be anywhere between 5 to 15 years, and then might buy for another second run again. The rights are very defined as to what they're buying. Are they buying theatrical rights, television rights, DVD rights, streamer rights, or maybe they're just buying television rights? So those rights are going to be very, very defined. And some distributors are known for pirating. If you sell a movie in China, China is known for pirating movies. So this is not a territory you want to sell first. Territories that are known for pirating should be sold last or not at all. When we talk about sales estimates, we're also talking about projections that we use to base our finance plan on. Sales estimates are projected international distribution revenues. And the take estimates, which are the low estimates, are used to value a film or TV show and its available collateral. Bankers, meaning senior lenders and junior lenders, as well as equity investors, look at this collateral, look at the take estimates to decide how much money they want to invest and how much money they want to lend. Pre-sales are distribution agreements concluded before a film or TV show is finished, I should say precisely is produced. And they are used to verify the market demand, meaning if you have a script and you have a great actor and a great director, and based on these elements, no distributor is buying, there is usually an issue with the project that should be revisited, and maybe the project needs to be repackaged or the script needs to be changed, something needs to happen. It's a conversation to be had with the sales agent, who will likely get feedback from the distributor as to why they're not buying. Sales and distribution agreements concluded after the film is finished. Pretty straightforward. Unsold rights are sales estimates that were projected minus pre-sales that were actually made. So when you have a sales estimate projection sheet and you take pre-sales out of that, you're basically removing collateral from the collateral pool. And the unsold rights is the remaining collateral that, for example, a bank or a senior lender can use to give you a gap loan against these unsold rights. Sales estimates and pre-sales are to happen at a certain level to project profitability or potential revenues for a film or television project. Sales estimates are international sales projection established by a sales agent reflecting the potential distribution revenues for a film or television project. These potential distribution revenues derive from international distributors who purchase an exclusive distribution license to release the film or TV show in their territory on their platforms. A pre-sale is a distribution agreement that is concluded before a film is produced or a TV show is produced and ready to be delivered to the distributor. Pre-sales reflect the current value of a film in the marketplace. They give you a direct and immediate confirmation whether or not the film meets the market demand. Now, how do we use sales estimates for funding? Sales estimates are projected international distribution revenues. And in order for a film project to make sense and to suggest profitability, those numbers need to be at a certain level in the take case, which means the low case. And I, in my experience in producing various films and have invested a lot of money into those films, have figured out that 70 to 75% of my budget needs to be projected to come back from the international distribution territories. This is obviously not covering the budget, but it covers quite a bit of the budget, and it helps me to establish a financial model for my investors that is profitable. And pre-sales, which are distribution agreements concluded before a film is finished or produced, they are used, as I mentioned earlier, to verify the market demand and tell me, is the market looking for the kind of product or the kind of film or TV show that I'm making right now? Or is my timing off, or is my everything off? I do need to check this, and I do always check myself to make sure I'm not entirely off when I'm working on a project. So pre-sales for me and for anyone, and especially investors, is a very important tool to understand the current market demand. Now here too, in order for this to be financially feasible and to make sense and to work as a risk mitigation strategy, the minimum should be 30 to 35% of the budget. And you have to think about it this way. If you make a movie that's $5 million and you're not able to even sell a third of this movie up front, why would you be doing the movie? You're already getting a signal that people don't want to buy this. So it's a very important thing to remember. Unsold rights are the rights that I have available after I take my sales estimates and have sold my pre-sales. The unsold rights are the rights that I still have available at the time the movie is produced to sell. So I have to look at this collateral and figure out, can I use this for something? And is it enough for my equity investor? Is it enough for my junior lender? And the bank and the junior lender and the equity investor, they will obviously look at the sales estimates after the pre-sales were made to see if there is enough money for them to give me a loan. I could get a gap loan for unsold rights. I could get a junior loan if after these unsold rights are taken as a collateral by the bank. And if there's still enough collateral available for the junior lender, how much money would they give me? And then the same for my equity investor. The equity investment, I have learned, is better to be kept at maximum 35% of the budget. I know this sounds rough, but we're going to learn about finance plans that make this absolutely possible. So when an equity investor finances 35% of the budget, pre-sales are done at about the same range, and international sales estimates are in the 70 to 75 range, there is a very strong possibility that this movie is going to have favorable returns for the investor and is going to be profitable also for the producer.
So when we look at the balanced finance plan and related elements, we start with looking at projected revenues, which is a projected valuation, and that is comprised of international sales estimates projected and US distribution estimates projected in connection with the budget of a film. So these projected valuations have to do with the script and the talent and the genre of the film, and they will lead us through estimates that are generated by the sales agents. So in the ideal world where we would want to generate profits, we would want to see international sales estimates to hit at minimum 70 to 75% of the budget, and US distribution estimates to hit 30 to 35% of the budget. So these are projected estimates. These are not actual revenues just yet. This is just us putting together a balanced finance plan based on projections. So what else do we need? We would like to see pre-sale distribution agreements generated in the value of 30 to 35% of the budget at minimum, if possible. We would like to see a gap loan against unsold distribution rights revenues that we can still generate of up to 20% of the budget. We would like to see subsidies, which are production subsidies in regions where we would shoot the movie, of at least 20% of the budget. And we want to see the equity not to exceed 35% of the budget. If we are able to balance the finance plan this way, we are very likely to generate profits. So when we look at our basic finance plan and how we put things together, and when we look at the way distribution estimates, meaning projections, also called sales estimates, also called ultimates, how they work, we often see that we can actually use that asset, meaning distribution, pre-sales, distribution agreements, distribution projections, in a way that we can raise money early on. And the way we do that is we have sales estimates, sales projections established from a bankable sales agent, and we also have that sales agent generate pre-sale distribution agreements for us. And pre-sale distribution agreements is nothing else than a regular license deal, than a regular distribution deal where we're selling a movie to a certain buyer in a certain country and give them the right to exploit our movie in that country for a certain period of time. That's what a license deal is, and that's what a distribution deal is. And a pre-sale deal is exactly the same, and the only difference is it happens and it is concluded while we're putting the movie together, so before the movie is produced. If the movie would have been finished and done, it would just be a distribution deal. It's the same deal. The difference is the timing. So in this pre-sale distribution deal, what happens here is that the distributor who buys the rights to release the movie in their territory agrees to buy the movie based on the script, based on the genre, based on the actor, based on the director, based on the producer, based on the budget, all those things that have to do with the film and are the film elements. They buy the film based on that, and they will then pay 20% of a down payment. So 20% of a license fee is paid right then and there when the pre-sale distribution deal is signed. That money is then held by the sales agent until we've raised all the other money for the movie, and the movie is on paper funded. And then during a process that we call the closing, the funds are then released to us, meaning to the producer to then produce the film. So a pre-sale is in essence a piece of paper, right? It's just a distribution deal. And we can take that distribution deal to the bank, and the bank gives us a loan for it. So the bank then realizes, the distributor might have paid an advance, paid a down payment. So if that is the case, we would be deducting that. If that is not the case, obviously we'll pay the distribution terms, meaning the payment, the license fee payment that is on the deal. So the pre-sale here in this example that I have generated for us for a movie that is $10 million is 3.5 million. So all the pre-sales we have done cumulative come to 3.5 million, and the bank decides, I'm going to give you a loan for 3.5 million for all your pre-sales. And then the bank does not just look at what do you have in pre-sales, in contracts. They also look at the sales estimates and decide the unsold rights that can still be sold have value for them. They're not going to give us money for all the unsold rights. Like in our situation here, we have projected that our international distribution revenues are 7.5 million. And of that, we have sold 3.5 million in international pre-sales, which leaves us with 4 million in international pre-sales to still be sold. And I should mention here that the US rights unless they're pre-sold already and then can be used as a pre-sale, are not valued by the bank in any shape or form because the US market is very volatile. So they will look at the US market as a zero unless we have an actual pre-sale. If we do, then they just cash flow that contract. But if we don't, they don't consider that as a value because it's a very difficult marketplace for a bank and they don't take risks. So for us, that means only the international sales estimates are of value to the bank. So the bank then says, again, we have 4 million left in international rights, and we, the bank, are very comfortable and believe that you can at least sell half of that. So they believe that the 2 million, which is 50% of 4 million, have a value, and they use that value to give us what is called a gap loan. So now we're looking at our loans and we're seeing, we have 3.5 million in pre-sales, so that's the pre-sale loan. We have 4 million unsold rights, for which the bank will give us $2 million as a loan. So altogether, our bank loan is now 5.5 million. And of course, we're always looking to shoot the movie in an incentivized region where we can get money simply for shooting there. And we're going to learn more about that in the financing module. But for now, just know that 20% of the budget coming in from an incentive is very reasonable. So this is money we don't have to pay back. This is money that is given to us because we're shooting in a region where we're being subsidized. That's why it's in this finance plan. And it's mentioned so that we can figure out what our equity is. So our equity in this case, when we have a bank loan of 5.5 million, we have an incentive of $2 million, would be 2.5 million, so we can reach the budget of $10 million. And if we're looking at how we are recouping this finance plan and are we actually making money, we're looking at the fact that our distribution revenues that we had mentioned earlier were projected to be $11 million, which included international and US distribution rights revenues. So now in the recoupment phase, we have actually generated that money. So we are selling the movie for what we have projected, which is $11 million. And then we have to pay the senior loan back, which I mentioned earlier is 5.5 million. And then we have to pay the equity back, which was 2.5 million. So in this very simple finance plan, I'm not even looking at distribution fees, sales fees, collection fees, premiums for equity investors, all of which is applicable, and we're going to learn about it in the next module. But for now, I just wanted you to understand that your sales estimates and the pre-sale distribution agreements have a really important value and can generate funding to be available to cover the production cost. The key activities include this week your submission of quiz 1 that is due by Sunday, and any additional key activities that might be announced on the Canvas calendar or in announcements. These are also due Sunday night. We are slowly diving into the first financial components here with our entertainment finance course. And of course, you might have some questions, which is perfectly fine. I would like you to check out the discussion board questions and answers, because a lot of questions have answers there. These are questions from previous students in previous courses. And of course, you can always feel free to email me via the Canvas inbox. Allow about 24 to 48 hours for me to respond. I will always respond. I'll always see the email, so no worries on that. So feel free to reach out. I hope you enjoyed your second week.